economic, racial, sexual, and other forms of cultural privilege and help reduce subterranean biases and debate practice. They forgot one, and that forgetting, which was an active forgetting, belies the more fundamental failure of thought by the one AC. It's not our status of citizens that allows us to gain the authority to speak. It's the fact that we aren't detained there, focused on the subject, over-obscured, and overridden the foreclosed category of the animal. Darren in 88, I didn't say that there was no problematic of the subject and distinction upon such that, pointing from afar to the inevitable return of a distinction between the human relation to the self, that is to say, the entity capable of conscious language or relation to death and such, etc., and then non-human relation to itself, incapable of phenomenological. As such, the distinction between animal and man has nowhere been more radical and more rigorous than Heidegger. The animal will never be a subject nor a docile. It does not have an unconscious either a rapport with the other as other. Why have I rarely spoken of the subject or subjectivity, but rather of an effect of subjectivity, because the discourse of the subject, even when it locates difference in adequation and dehiscence within auto-affection, even if it acknowledges that the animal is capable of auto-affection, etc., this discourse nevertheless that it does not grant a subjectivity, and this concept remains marked by all the presuppositions which I have just recalled. Also at stake here, of course, is responsibility, freedom, truth, ethics, and law. The distinction between bare life, when they describe bare life as being reduced to mere biology and one worth living, is predicated on the human-animal divide, and is the foundational division of law itself. Cauchy, and not the distinction between bare life and good life is the legal political distinction. This distinction already contains within it a prior distinction, which is the survival of humans as distinguished from and formed against the survival of non-human animals. At the basis of this distinction, and hence at the basis of law, resides the human-animal distinction. The attempt to return humanity to the prisoner obscures the structural complicity of Western law-wielding subjects in a species war that makes endless production of carcasses in the global south possible. Pugliese in 13, the CIA black site is not the prison house of the human. The object may becomes a carcass. I deploy the carcass to disrupt the hold of residual humanisms and would demand of the victim. Some agency this works to reassure the privileged Western subject confronted at sight of utter rejection that something human remains, even if they are structurally complicit in the violence they abhor, even as their sense of human rights-bearing subjects is predicated on the human-animal. Other to demand or extract agency from the victims inflict yet another level of symbolic violence by imposing a redemptive narrative undone at every turn. The figure of the carcass enables me to account for what would otherwise continue to remain inexplicable. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqi, Afghan, Pakistani civilians have died, failed to register in the West as deaths. As such a biopolitical story renders all those civilians killed as so many animal carcasses do not die but merely perish. Inscribing this Western projection of the human carcass in the global south as a metaphysics of virulent ratio and ratio anthropocentrism. The violent operations of ratio speciesism renders the subjects of the global south non-human animals captivated in their lawlessness, and this outweighs every impact when they seek to return to the subject, when they seek to return humanity to the prisoner. This only causes far more violence than they resolve, and it's a priori unethical. Wolf and 3. For about 2 centuries, we have been involved in the alarming rate of acceleration and the transformation of our experience of animals. Traditional treatment has been turned upside down by the geological, ethological, biological, and genetic forms of knowledge and intervention, regimentalization, genetic experimentation, industrialization, insemination, manipulation of the genome, reduction of the animal to production of meat. No one can seriously deny this disavowal of all this involves to organize on the global scale of forgetting or misunderstanding of this violence that someone compares to the worst case of genocide. This genocide is occurring through the organization of exploitation of an artificial, infernal, virtually interminable survival conditions. Generations would have, previous generations would have judged monstrous outside every supposed norm of life, products of animals that are exterminated by means of their continued existence of overpopulations. Is throwing people into ovens or gas chambers. Doctors and geneticists decided to organize the overproduction of Jews by means of artificial insemination, so that being more numerous they could be destined to be in always increasing numbers for the same health, the same abattoirs. The value of animal rights is that it involves a new re-experience of the compassion, the ultimate question of suffering and compassion. Refuse the choice of the affirmative. Only an absolute refusal to move the lines of violence can prevent the liquidation of life that is at the root cause of detention policy and the war on terror. Pugliese in 13, in the punction packs, the hooded detainees are compelled to embody the vegetable and animal life. The solution is not to shuffle the categories of life up or down the biopolitical hierarchy. This merely reproduces the system while leaving intact the governing power to render inoperative the machine that governs. Our conception of man will no longer seek new articulations, but to show the central emphasis that separates man and animal. The seeking of new articulations of life will be valorized as more authentic, which will merely reproduce the machine in order to short-circuit this machine. A deconstructive move is needed. The challenge is to proceed to inhabit the hiatus, to run the risk of living the emptiness of an atopical locus. This non-foundational locus is the open marked by the reciprocal suspension of the human and animal, something for which we perhaps have no name. The anthropocentrism that derives from this biopolitical regime ensures that whatever is designated as non-human animal life continues to be branded not only as expendable and enslavable, but unsavable. In the context of post-9/11, the U.S. gulags, the biopolitical regime of state terror that is what guarantees the production of captive life and enables its categorization as the unsavable. Once captive life is thus designated, it can be liquidated without compunction. Case. Their strategy in particular relies on a hermeneutics of suspicion that totalizes privilege, forces a concession of privilege, and insists that the game is being rigged, destroys our ability to accurately conceptualize identity construction, as well as ignoring other modes of oppression like that of the non-human animal neminin. 10.8, hermeneutics of suspicion is predicated on revealing such idols or dynamics as white blood by tying together a set of cause and effect relationship by evoking whiteness by proponents explain what was not understood. History's biographies and ruminations reveal other manifestations of whiteness, despite the fact that whites don't recognize whiteness as a function of its power, which secures itself by refusing to identify itself. A hermeneutics of suspicion is a self-confirming belief system to deny that whiteness is omnipresent, is proof that whiteness is omnipresent, to protest is evidence, to observe that some whites are materially worse off than non-whites is a rhetorical movement. Hermeneutics of suspicion that is skeptical of the dominant discourse, but the white elite manipulates language and rules of the game to reframe race relations. For example, master scripting is to prevent the counter voices from challenging white supremacy and affirming an alternative humanity. Master scripting requires the non-white dance the performance of subjugation, which is sustained through the institutional practices such as tracking. When it is confronted, whites make the classic move of deracializing events. These moves sustain an illusory state of equality. White students are asked to explain in ontological terms the oppressive basis of their being. Then they are to accept the responsibility for the atrocity of the past, acknowledge their complicity, and undergo corrective socialization. Allegedly, white students resist seeking tragedies to disrupt their entitlement. They trivialize racism in courses that students view as non-biased, the embodiment of whiteness. The point is not to prove that students are racist, that is a given, but to undercut the authority from which they speak for true racial reconciliation. To ignore white students must admit that they are racist, then they must confess. White confessionals bring to light the insidiousness of white privilege. However, confessing is not enough. Whiteness studies are constructed on the foundation that consists of broad generalizations, ontological claims, and critique. Their defense rests on a caricature of professional sociology. Despite recognition that the racial classification are not constant, proponents of whiteness studies treat whites as if they were a mutable category. They posit a generic white subject privilege, unaware of that privilege. Even if whites coalesce at certain historical junctions, we cannot conclude that category will continue indefinitely. Reification as the unintended consequence of neglecting our racial identities. Our negotiated process by which whiteness studies understand the contradictions within white and non-white identity. They oversimplify the challenge that whites face, and implying that their problems are largely attributable to racism. They emphasize a unifying interest in dominance, minimizes the boundaries of racial categories are negotiated, largely ignores our interaction between race, class, and the struggle of many whites to acquire privileges. Reifying race fails to capture the process through which it exerts a structuring effect by suppressing intergroup divisions. Whiteness studies perpetuates an us-them view of difference of reification of racial categories and does with the causal, potential, predictive ability implied that all persons classified will exhibit undesirable traits. Being white is a condition in need of corrective attention. Whiteness studies prize racism as monocausal, all other forces are relegated. Most work is dismissed out of hand. Whites actively resist or perpetuate existing inequalities. This allows for subsequent argument that whiteness is oppression if it is to be eradicated. Social justice is to emerge. Once whiteness is demonized, whites have no choice but to view themselves in context of the deficit model. Whites are required to renounce their whiteness and celebrate alternatives. Such inevitably results in bafflement and gatekeeping. The movement standpoint epistemology develops into group solipsism, disables coalitions, and actual activism. Hill for entry standpoint epistemology can become a solipsism with a we instead of I, a form of group narcissism. The intellectual class, the oppressive standpoint, so they continue to serve as objects of exemplary discourse. Identity politics in the long run, and oxymoron theory disables the conditions by which normal politics work, substituting their own tribalism vision. Coalition limiting itself has no chance of bringing about an even minor change. Their adoption, their invocation of the voice of Guantanamo detainee number 329 is not unmediated, but precisely relies on the contradiction of the subaltern that renders their case impossible to alleviate the harms they address. Chicago Cultural Studies group in 92, a romance of authenticity in which intellectuals begin to consider any intervention or betrayal of the subaltern voice. The patterns in groups makes it easier to think of these subjects as pre-constituted to define the authentic native voice. The highly problematic. Any instance of the subaltern voice speaking would entail some kind of intermediary role recovering that subaltern consciousness is impossible and necessarily encounters consciousness as a reified object thus facing its political agency. This kind of subjectivity is constituted in any comparative analysis can never be simply equivalent to native subjectivity. The process of intellectual knowledge production introduces a significant departure from the context it describes. Even if they were to conclusively end the war on terror, it would be insufficient to solve the cycles of violence. They identify the Cold War and the war on crime are comparatively a stronger root cause. McLeod in 8. It will not be sufficient to end the war on terror for the same ideological vacuum that troubled the 90s after the Cold War. Then it likely again loom large, and the same war-making models will provide a race solution. The roots in the current movement is directed in wars with no conceivable end are to be found in the pathologies of the Cold War and the war on international crime, not in the U.S. response to September 11. To think outside these terms as a struggle that existed long before September 11 will require acts of imagination that demand more than an end to current wars. The military, actually, that's not.
Why is the alternative?
The alternative is to reject this invocation of a particular biopolitical hierarchy where you try to reinvigorate the detainee with subjectivity, to understand their subject position, to place ourselves in the subject position. We say is to consume it. And our argument is that belies a larger structure of oppression that delineates a clear distinction between human and animal and renders the animal pure biology.
What does the alternative do for the bodies that are in Guantanamo Bay?
in the sense that your app does something for the bodies of Guantanamo Bay without literally without going there and doing something, in the sense that we think that communicative interventions are important, we think that a prior investigation of the juridical lines that enable the violence against both non-human animals and humans is bad. Not that there is.
You read this piece of wolf evidence outweighs everything. How do you solve the entirety of this evidence?
Well, this is, once again, a weird question. How do we ethically orient ourselves toward this?
Right, okay. So if it's about how we ethically orient ourselves, then what part of the alternative or the criticism announces its own privilege that you have?
We are privileged in that we consider ourselves to be subjects. We are human. We consume.
So I guess I'm a little confused. The piece of Derrida evidence talks about how creating a subject is problematic. What is the difference in terms of the alternative? Why don't you link to this evidence too?
We deny the notion that a subject is a fully constituted thing.
What part of the app fully constitutes a subject?
The one in which you presume a subject, all your evidence that talks about your impact evidence talks about human subjectivity as something to be reclaimed. Your idea that you can occupy the position of the subject
if we win the argument
presumes that the subject is conscious in the same way that humans are.
If we win the argument that the app is a means to understand subject, but not a perfection of the subject, does it?
No, because our point is you have started from the position of the human as subject. And
how could you not do that too?
Because we have begun from a critique of that position. Okay. We are a deconstruction of any possibility of the human subject.
Any possibility of the human subject?
Yes.
Then how would you...
What, so...
There is no such thing as the human subject.
Okay. You read this piece of evidence that talks about, or the Kochi evidence that talks about how the animal is the basis for bare life versus good life. How does this evidence assume the world of a Guantanamo detainee?
Our Pugliese evidence is extremely good in assuming the world, whatever that means.
Sure.
You have described the world of the, for them you have described the world of the Guantanamo detainee to be bare life. We are saying that the basis for that, when you say they are reduced to mere biology, there is an unthought other, right? What is mere biology? We argue that it is the position of the non-human animal that you continually reify.
So animals, so is the assumption of your argument that animals are the non...
It is our assumption that that is how you define the animal.
Yep, I started it.